This magazine article comes from the MuscleMag Annual 77, and it covers the World Bodybuilding Guild, the WBBG Super Show in New York. It is a Reynolds-Denny report. It says the MuscleMag International Annual is proud to present a first in contest reporting. This is not just a contest results feature, but an analytical discussion by two of the leading writers and prolific photojournalists in our physical culture magazine field today. From the American West Coast, the land touted as being the home of the gods and the center of physiquedom, Bill Reynolds. Presenting the East Coast Muscle Eye view, the only writer we know of who has no last name, literally speaking, Denny. The World Bodybuilding Guild's 1976 Professional Mr. America, Pro Mr. World, Teenage Mr. America, Miss Body Beautiful, Mr. America Over 40, and the first annual Mr. Olympus for Super Champs took place at the Beacon Theater on Broadway at 74th Street on Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. The event was produced and directed by WBBG President Dan Laurie. Guests of honor at the event were the well-known actors and Olympian athletes Johnny Weissmuller and Buster Crabbe. Denny. The World Bodybuilding Guild event was run differently this year than any other year due to the fact that we had it on a Sunday afternoon. This was both nice and a bit of a hazard too, don't you think? Bill. I think in general the prejudging started between 9 and 9:30 in the morning, and that may be a pretty hazardous hour for anybody expecting to be performing at their best. Denny. I don't know if this is particularly good because at that hour it may be rather hard to pre-pump warm-up. Bill. Well, I can speak for myself. I know I certainly couldn't, but I think there are a host of bodybuilders who train early in the morning. There's Bill Pearl, Dave Draper used to, and Dale Adrian trained that way for the WBBG World this year. Denny. Well, training and pumping up as you like, but as a reporter and photographer of these things at that hour, I can't even see that well. Bill. Hear, hear. If the photos and lineups of contestants are out of focus, which I shot, that may have been my problem too because of heavy lids. Hell, you live out in the boondocks, and we had to get up at 5:30 just to get there on time. Denny. The judging panel was pretty sober and balanced as far as I could see. The group was headed by Jules Levine of RJ Health Studio, and he worked as a non-voting coordinator who could potentially break ties. I'm not sure, but I think in the night contest, Dale Adrian and Tony Emmett were tightly tied, and Jules may have scored the point that put Emmett in the Mr. World slot. Bill. No, I later saw the judging sheets down at WBBG headquarters, and as it checked out, the final voting without Levine's vote was a 1-point victory for Emmett over Adrian. Denny. The judges, as I numbered them, came to around 23, which is a heck of a massive decision-making body for physique appraisal. I saw Joe Williams of the Olympic Health Club, Walter Podolak of the Golden Superman HC, he's usually in the Mr. A over 40, Al Fives of the Olympus Health Club, Don Andretta of Jersey's Atlas and Guys and Dolls HCs, Ralph Bianco of Brooklyn's Spartan Gyms for Men and Women, Tommy Orr of New York City's Profile HC, Dave Asness of Asness HC, Jersey, Johnny Barbaro of Bath Beach Gym, Paul Gallietti of the College HC, and Nick Girolamo, who owns a place called, and this is no joke, Gump's Gym. A gym operator can make a good appraisal because, after all, he is a coach, but these men were balanced by some top physique people as well as big reps. Dave Asness and Andretta fit into this class, both having a slew of titles. Podolak, too. The big boost of this situation was the participation of Mr. America, Mr. Universe George Eiferman, Josh Rivera, a former Mr. Eastern America, Mr. Latin America, Shell Person, Mr. Sweden, Bill Surtis, a 50s great, Mr. New York State, and 1975 Mr. New York City, John Colacioni. But even they were augmented by some well-known people who permeate our field, like the president of the Professional Bodybuilding Alliance, Chris Devon, former wrestler and lifter Leo Murdoch, art expert and PC journalist Franklin Page, another lifting champion, Hy Scheifer, Danny Stiles of radio station WEVD, physique man Andy Bastinto of the health club gym chain industry. Although most of these fellows came from the East Coast, Ife came from the West, Page kind of middle America, and internationally person added order. Bill. Well, I noticed from this list of judges, as opposed to past years in WBBG championships, was the relative absence of local celebrities on the panel. Here I'm talking about people who best have a very hazy knowledge of judging. In the past, there have been 4 or 5, and this year only Danny Stiles, the radio commentator, was the only one lacking experience in the scope of things. That's definitely a step in the right direction. Denny. Well, at the prejudging, we found this year a much larger contingent of teenagers than ever before, of higher quality physique-wise. The top 3 were very close. Bill. When I originally assayed the teenage lineup, the fellows who caught my eye was Russell Cunningham of Future Man Gym. They had to split the entries into 3 sections. In the second lineup and third, this Scott Doring from Minneapolis, Minnesota started to show me something. In my opinion, that guy has got as much potential as I've seen in a long time. He has a lot of shape with almost flawless symmetry. He poses pretty well, and the only thing that seems to be holding him back at all right now is maybe a small lack of cuts, and as he gets more mature, he'll pick up additional size. Denny. I felt that too, but I found one fellow who didn't fare too well in spite of the fact that he'd gotten some advanced publicity was Mark Stevens. Bill. Yeah, he fell to 7th. Denny. Something that upsets me with the younger bodybuilders is the fact they're making themselves up excessively with tattoos. This kills your normal appearance, not to mention your physical appeal. Bill. Well, that particular tattooing phenomenon was explained to me by Harvey Keith, who is Steve Davis's training partner out in California, where I come from. Harvey's from Brooklyn, and he has an abundance of tattoos on his arms and other parts of his body. In his opinion, a tattoo is to some degree symbolizes proof of manhood out there in Brooklyn. Denny. The Mr. America over 40 took on a more youthful physique glow this year, too. They've reduced the out-of-shape fat men and downright out-of-shape oldies who do it for a gag. The top 5 were top. Bill. That was kind of interesting because posing improved as well. Funny thing, it always seems you can't find 1 or 2 top names who were famous in the early 60s, and then all of a sudden you see them on the platform, and the whole thing takes on an aura of nostalgia. Let's save them for when we talk about the night event. Denny. Okay. Well, jumping into the professional Mr. America prejudging, the breakdown lineups pulled it heavily towards Scott Wilson and Don Ross. I was tremendously impressed by these 2, along with Pat Neve. Bill. I'd also like to include Annabelle Lopez, Joe Caserta, and Tommy Mijom, and the top 7, if not the top 10, were outstanding, far more than I've been led to expect by the past lineups in these WBBGers. Denny. I think one of the super shocks was Scott Wilson. He has a physique that's very deceptive. It tends to be slightly smooth when relaxed, but when he hits his poses, and this happened at the prejudging and lineups for best parts, and that grind, all of a sudden, he just seemed to break out. Bill. All right, 2 things along that line. If we compare him and the AAU Mr. America, I think Cal Scalak has that same kind of quality of looking smooth and then cutting up automatically as he flexes. And one thing that really turned it for Scott Wilson in the prejudging is his polish and how he handles himself under the scrutiny. This guy is relatively unknown on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, he's won Mr. California and Mr. Southern California in 1974. He placed in the top 6 at the AAU Mr. America in 1975. His training partner is Ralph Kroger, who happened to be the WBBG Mr. America last year. And I'm sure that Ralph coached him on platform technique and how to handle yourself in a contest. As an example of this, if you watch him in the lineup, you'd see that he lets everyone else hit their poses first, and then he just seems to pull one out of his bag of tricks that looks a little better than what everyone else is throwing up there. Denny. In the pro world, I think this was the first time in the history of this event that it was Panicsville. This was absolutely the hardest Mr. World to judge I've ever seen. One of my big disappointments in the event was the slight smoothness of a bodybuilding hero of mine, Chet Yorton. Bill. Yeah, I never cease to be amazed at how tenuous or how close a lineup there is between being too smooth or just right or being too drawn. It's a tough thing to hit. Perhaps Chet mistimed his training and diet. He may have been peaking for the Mr. Universe a week later in London. I'm not sure of this, but he definitely was a little smooth. Denny. Of course, the 4 giants in that prejudging were Thompson, Adrian, Emmett, and Walgren, plus a new face not seen here in America and in from France, Césarien Leon. On the France entries, I found the 6th place man, Jacques Neuville, to impress me a lot more than Césarien Leon. I think their placing could have been switched rather easily. This has to have been the WBBG's best lineup to date historically. We found it in two recent AAU Mr. Americas, Ron Thompson in 1974 and Dale Adrian in 1975. Erling Wahlgren has won Mr. Europe, and I think he's won Mr. Scandinavia for 3 straight years. And of course, Tony Emmett is certainly one of the great professionals, as proven by his Class 1 win in the Pro NABA Mr. Universe a week later. Denny, before we talk tally, the public end of this event, I was mainly out front where it was murderous, sweaty, tense, and visually maddening. You were popping backstage, Bill. What was going on behind the scenes in the shadows off stage, prejudging pump up? Bill, yeah, it's kind of a combination of pandemonium, anxiety, fear a lot of times. Having been a physique contestant a lot of times as you have, I'm sure you recognize this. There's a lot of panic when you're being judged. You're always looking out of the corner of your eye at the fellow next to you and saying, what am I doing in this contest? Look how good that guy is. Then there's always a chance fellows are talking nervously back and forth that will psych each other out while they're trying to find others' new training secrets. One of the most interesting things I ever saw along this line was at the 1975 AAU Mr. America with Robbie Robinson and Dale Adrian. These were two of the most quiet bodybuilders I know, and they seemed to hit it off real well, and they hung in a corner chattering about working out. Dale came and told me later on that he's learned a lot from Robbie and that they trained very similarly. And then that year, Dale won the overall title and Robbie won the most muscular. Denny, the actual afternoon event looked like it would be a giant disappointment to the WBBG audience-wise. This was because it started to look veritably empty for some reason at the Beacon Theater that seats around 2,400 people. Suddenly, during the teenage event, people seemed to emerge or fall in from the sky and fill all the seats. It was an appreciative, responsive crowd which experienced a number of shocking upsets from a fairness standpoint, although this is only my opinion. Bill, well, talking about the crowd, this was my first show in New York, for example. I've been brought up on reading all these articles about how berserk the people are at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and it used to go when the fellows like Larry Scott posed. And I was a bit let down, really. I expected somewhat of a berserk crowd here, and it was a little more genteel than I was myself expecting to see and hear. Denny, well, in the Teenage Mr. America, the final scorecard read 8th, Eddie Pasolano, 7th, Mark Stevens, 6th, Bob Savori, 5th, Ralph Secente, 4th, Jose Guzman, and the big three that boiled down to Mike Fiore, 3rd, Russ Cunningham, 1st, and Scott Doring, 1st. Well, we talked about Cunningham and Doring earlier, but Fiore is interesting to me because he's only 17, as I recall, and he seemed to have all the lines and the type of V shape that a bodybuilder really needs to make it to the top. I think he has a pretty good future, too. It would not surprise me to see him win this contest next year or the year after, because he will be eligible for 2 more years. In the over 40 Mr. America, we saw 5th place go to a smiling, laughing John Bianculli, posing at the audience, yelling and hitting his shots like a wild man. This is his traditional way of hitting it. Bill, this was a bit of a surprise to me because this guy kind of yells, hollows at everybody. Oh, yeah. Denny, I've had to term him a personality poser because of this. In 4th, we had a well-shaped black man named Fred Jarrett with an easy pair of 19-inch arms. Bob Belotis flew in from Toronto, Canada to take 2nd, and he must have been well over 6 feet tall, the tallest in this event, weighing in around 230. His physique was also good enough to let him alternately enter the Mr. World that day. Then the ageless Kenny Hall, Mr. Abdominals, took 1st. As we moved into the Miss Body Beautiful USA, we viewed a small entry which had no prejudging priority. They all presented a dignified front as well as quite a few things that were most stimulating to see and appraise. Bill, well, I'd like to say that I fought tooth and nail with several other fellows for the privilege of pinning the numbers on these young women, and it was indeed a pleasure. Denny, my favorite, although she didn't take 1st but won 4th, was Tina Marie. She was a shapely, full-bodied lady with a rather heavy upper body development. Then came Nitsa Maldonado, a well-known model and belly dancer, in 3rd. Raven-haired Marie Vallis was 2nd and looked good enough, although she could have used a little more bulk in the chest area. Bill, she was interesting because she was the only one who wore a one-piece bathing suit. Everyone else faced the audience in a bikini 2-piece. When I was pinning numbers on it, I found pretty much narrowed the field down, and my choice was Vicky Lee, who did win. Denny. The prejudging allowed a lot of major annoyance and time waste to be eliminated. Giving the awards out at the end of each individual contest kept it moving and more emotionally rousing than the past tiresome hang-up of the end procedure. Bill. I'd have to agree with that. It gives the contestants a break as well. Denny. In the pro, we had some money goodies. Best body parts got $25, as did places 6 through 10, $50 to 4th and 5th, and $100, $250, and $500 with a trip to the NABA in London for the big three, respectively. Dan Samuda was 10th, Victor Voroskes 9th, George Karras 8th, Tommy Mijom 7th. Bill. The only thing that beats that kid is his height, because Mijom's got everything. Denny. In 6th was Bill Howard from the West Coast. 5th was Joe Caserta. Then came one of the super surprises, Annabelle Lopez in 4th with best abdominals. He was leaving the AAU organization, was a giant blow to them, I'd say. Bill. Having seen Annabelle in several AAU shows, I feel if he'd been in his top condition, he would have given Scott Wilson a considerable run. Annabelle looked just a tad smooth to me. Denny. Did I say surprise? Well, I meant double surprise. One of the other great AAU champions. Boom. Zoomed into 3rd. It was Pat Neve, former Mr. USA. Also taking best chest and arms. He certainly wasn't the Neve I remember only months ago in Philadelphia. Cut, ripped, and dynamic. Bill. Well, there's no doubt in my mind that Pat could very easily have won the contest had he been in top shape. I think he's been training very hard, but having a little bit of difficulty with his diet. He appeared a few hairs smooth. One of the problems here was Pat is a very emotional trainer. He has to have his goals defined. He had a backer or sponsor who promised to bring him to the contest but didn't send him the ticket until the last minute. So he kind of hovered in a state of unsureness, which played havoc on his training approach. Denny. Well, next came Don Ross, who took 2nd with best back and most muscular. Bill. It was the 2nd straight that he took most muscular in this contest, and he surprised me. I'd seen pictures of him and had long phone conversations with him, but I never saw him in the flesh. In person, he's much bigger than I expected. His legs were much better than what I'd seen in photos. He posed very enthusiastically. Denny. Except he lacked a tan. Bill. Well, that may be what beat him. I think he used a tanning preparation, but even with that, it wasn't enough. Denny. Then I would say the AAU lost a super champ potentially, but the WBBG gained a professional Mr. America. Basically, Scott Wilson was hardly known here on the East Coast, and during the judging, I sat and said to myself, is that Scott Wilson, the fellow I've seen on some covers? They don't use names in prejudging, just numbers. And no way does he resemble his photos. I mean, the guy was murderous to face. He killed the others. Bill. He came from San Diego for this contest, and as I mentioned earlier on a legend on the West Coast, having won everything out there. He's simply beaten everyone any good out there. Generally speaking, the guys who win the tops excel in 3 body parts. They have good delts, good calves, and good forearms. Scott is exceptional in all these areas. He only trained 7 months for the show after a year layoff. He's now very motivated and he wants to put in 2 serious years of training to see where it takes him. He was a very outstanding winner. Denny. In the Mr. World Top 7, I'm sorry to say it, Chet, but Chet Yorton bombed out. He will be back better than ever. He's that kind of man. 6 and 5 went to Jacques Nouveau and Cesarion Leon. One of my great expectations hearing so much about Erling Wahlgren, who took 4th and was smashed since his posing routine, as I saw it, was off. And as I praised it, awkward. Bill. Erling has 2 problem areas physically. Number 1, his calves are very under par. And number 2, there's something strange about his shoulder formation. His shoulders seem to slope as if not having any shoulders at all, and yet as he poses, his deltoids are magnificent to see. It may be the way he stands in posture, but it's very hard to define. Denny. Ron Thompson in 3rd actually scared me. I mean, he has the most different looking physique I've ever seen. It's the fullest looking physique, roundest looking physique, and with all this, he has superior cuts. But I think he too was a tint off in skin color. But, and I say but, it was a heavy, heavy deal in the top 2 for Dale and Tony. These guys were so close, and Dale was just a step away. But my opinion is Emmett deserved nailing Dale on the back poses where Adrian is very weak. Bill. The way I saw it, Adrian had the more classically shaped physique and a better posing routine probably than Emmett. And yet Emmett has more size and almost equal cuts. He did have that better balance in the back, had better arms, legs, and abdominals. In the other areas, chest and shoulders and back, Emmett came out. It may very well have been this was Emmett's third or fourth try at the Mr. World, and sentiment may have carried him a little bit. But anyway, he won it by 1 vote, and he was certainly a worthy winner. Denny, I felt he was a popular winner as far as the audience went. Bill, I don't think so, really, because I got the impression that when Dale was announced for second, there were quite a few boos. Denny, well, you have to remember that Dale was last year's Mr. America, and this was an American audience. Perhaps over in London, England, the responses might have been reversed. Bill, yeah, well, let's put it this way. I had lunch with Tony after the prejudging, and I found him to be very considerable more than just a body. He's a very intelligent conversationalist and very congenial person. Denny, okay, now we're down to the winning super line with this Dan Laurie muscle thriller, the first annual Mr. Olympus. Who is the greatest bodybuilder in the world? I can't help it. I'm going to say Arnold Schwarzenegger is. Bill, oh, but I've seen him lately, and he weighs about 215, and he's very slender, besides being, as he puts it, retired, going after his acting career. Denny, I don't go for false bravado like when Sergio took the platform and started yelling, "Where's Arnold?" Now, you just know that there's no way you're ever going to see Arnold at a World Bodybuilding Guild show. This is no matter whether Sergio screams it, writes it down, or shoots it into the air in the form of fireworks. But that has nothing to do with it, in my opinion. Oh, let's shelve my opinion and talk platform turkey here. Let's discuss the lineup for the event. Bill, no, let's talk about Sergio. I thought he looked the worst I've ever seen him, and I viewed him personally 5 or 6 times. Here he was extremely smooth. Denny, well, let's not go into overkill here. Let's discuss the field of contestants at number 4, and included Mr. A, Mr. U, Chris Dickerson, only moments old 1976 WBBG Mr. World Tony Emmett, and this fantastic man from Paris whom you refer to as the Black Prince of Paris, Serge Nubret, and Oliva, and that's the way they placed 2 in that order from 4th to 1st. When Oliva came out, he made a little speeches of apology to the WBBG audience, some of whom he had gone to a special dinner to honor him the day before, and he wasn't there due to the prior engagement. He commented here good-naturedly, "Win or lose, I'm here tonight." And of course, the Arnold excitement getting remarked. Well, when Sergio posed, first he was received wildly because this was the great Oliva, but when he knocked Nubret into second in the awards, the audience booed like hell. At this point, knowing Serge, I had a strange, ominous feeling that Sergio was going to turn around and give him the trophy to Nubret, but I guess that just wasn't in the cards. Bill, my personal opinion based on Sergio's shape, I could have easily placed him even below Tony Emmett, and some people even had him 4th. He was too smooth, and I don't think there's any way that Serge Nubret could have lost that contest on physical comparisons alone. I feel Nubret lost to Oliva's awesome reputation and to that alone. Denny, funny sidelight to this act, even Dan Laurie took a personal poll of his own, and he said he too felt Nubret was the better shaped physique man between the two. The man I left a pang of sorrow for was Chris Dickerson, whom many criticized because he walked off the stage. It wasn't the fact that he walked off the stage. There's a lot more to be said for this man. It was just the way he walked off the stage. Placing 4th, he just threw his arms up in the air and looked at the ceiling for a second, and not in a nasty fashion. It looked like he was just saying, "It's over and it hurts. Oh, how it hurts." A lot of people misunderstand this, but you have to realize that this Mr. Universe and Mr. America had been a sportsman-like champion for 7 or 8 years and had seen a lot of defeat, most recently a few times in London as he rose. At these times, he just stood there and shook hands with the man who beat him. How much endurance does a champion's ego have? Chris's exit was neither nasty or vindictive in any way. He just sadly left the top 3 to themselves, and of course, in this show, there was no actual top 3, but just a top 1. Sergio Oliva, Mr. Olympus. And then the final view from the West Coast, Bill Reynolds. I've heard a lot about WBBG contests. I've heard they were disorganized as a general rule, and I noticed in the past their lineups were not of a superior quality. But I was here rather favorably impressed despite the bias I had going into this. The show ran off relatively smoothly. The physiques were very, very high quality. I disgruntled with the judges on a couple of the points, but I disagree with the judges in almost every contest I've ever been to. Overall, I'd say it had to be pretty much of a high point for me. and it was one of the better contests that I'd seen. The final viewpoint from the East Coast, Denny. I've seen wild turnabouts and contests before back here in the East, and I'll probably see many more. But I feel as far as the East Coast goes, although in American bodybuilding, the greatest champions live out on the West Coast, and more are moving in from the international scene. Regardless of what they originate from, the most dynamic physique competitions in the world are held here, looking out towards the Atlantic Ocean. All right, the end.